Hello and welcome back to our channel, guys. This time we are bringing another nostalgic show for you guys. Well, while most 90s cult shows often end with some dramatic season cancellations or some network issues, Highlander the series seemed to have just hopped off the road, you know? Its final season didn't feel much like a final season as compared to a possible audition season. If you have watched it, you know what I mean. And don't worry even if you haven't, because what am I here for, eh? Well, if you want to know more about how the show actually ended, especially after knowing the fact that it had a two-part finale and has influences from a Christmas classic, then sit back and relax while I take you through the whole unfolding of the show. So here's how 6 seasons of sword fights, immortality, and there can only be one actually wrapped up.
I know the rules. You and me. Now.
A French-backed experiment in American syndication. Let's back up a step and look at how strange the show was conceived in the first place, because it explains a good chunk of why the second half of its run unfolded the way it did. Highlander the series wasn't just some regular American network show, it was conceived in Europe. Christopher Lambert, fresh off the first 2 Highlander movies, connected producers Peter Davis and Bill Panzer with Christian Charest, the president of French media giant Gaumont, who wanted to establish a presence in television. Gaumont acquired the rights and launched the series into first-run syndication in the US, a pioneering move as it was one of the first times a French production company would take creative lead on an English-language show targeting the American market. On top of Gaumont, the series was co-financed by Germany's RTL+, Italy's Rete Italia, Japan's Amuse Video, and France's TF1, with the American side handled by Reicher. That kind of fractured international financing setup tends to start wobbling a lot the longer a show goes on, and it forms the backdrop to what eventually happened to the show's episode counts. The co-production deal actually meant the show was shot in 2 geographically distinct blocks. The first block was shot in Vancouver, which substituted for the fictional Seacouver, Washington, and the second block was shot in Paris, France, hence the show's stylistic shift between the grungy antique shops of the Pacific Northwest and the Parisian barges floating on the Seine. It's a European production wrapped in the garb of an American syndication drama, and that tension between international funding and creative control defines it up through its final season. The money itself demonstrates how unusual the arrangement was. The first season reportedly had a budget of $26.1 million, and Richter's president at the time noted that about 3/4 of that guaranteed budget came from overseas sales, with only 1/4 on the American side. Since the producers retained distribution rights, the show reportedly brought in roughly $800,000 per episode from international sources alone, one of the strongest showings of the entire 1992-93 syndication season. Such a deal requires all the partners to keep paying their share, but halfway through production, France's quota regulations changed, prompting original partner TF1 to drop out because French regulators did not consider Highlander to be French enough to count toward quota. Gaumont replaced them with a smaller French channel, M6, for about half the amount TF1 had been paying. None of that is a dramatic revelation on its own, but it's the first inkling that the show's finances were perhaps not quite as solid as those of an American network series, and it comes into play again once the episode count starts shrinking during the last 2 seasons.
McLeod, I'm Slan Quince, and I've come for your head.
Why the show wasn't about Connor McLeod. If you only knew Highlander from the 1986 movie, the TV series probably messed with you straight away because Christopher Lambert's Connor McLeod only shows up in one, semi-ish episode. The character appears in the pilot, The Gathering, to establish his younger kinsman Duncan McLeod as a Highlander, dumps some lore, and then largely exits. By that point, Lambert had played Connor in 2 features, and most sources suggest he was unwilling to commit to a full, multi-year TV gig. That pilot, which established all the rules and mythology in a single go, had actually been envisioned as a possible 3rd film before the budget issues and Lambert's eventual/partial availability shifted it to a 1-hour pilot. That sole appearance made everything in the show about Duncan McLeod. His antique shop, his girlfriend Tessa Noel, his teen sidekick Richie Ryan, his centuries of life experience, the whole package. The pilot explains the mythology in real time, kid Richie is breaking into the antique shop when he witnesses Duncan battling some bad guy. Connor arrives and tells Duncan that he has to get back into the game, the term the Immortals use for all of the head-taking sword fights that lead to one ultimate winner, and Duncan takes his first quickening in the show, after decapitating said bad guy. Connor's final instruction to Duncan is, look after the kid, and that's how Richie joins the main cast in episode 2. It's a weird way to start the new series. Show the audience the guy they already know for a brief moment and then tell them that this brand new character is in charge, and hopefully they'll be sticking around for at least a few years. They stuck around. In fact, Duncan quickly proved more popular than Connor with the TV audience. But it meant there was no built-in buffer character or audience backup. From episode 2 on, it was all on the new lead's shoulders, with each subsequent season having to work from scratch to justify the gamble. The losses that shaped the back half. By the time the 6th season finale rolled around, the show had already steadily culled its initial cast members, a loss that accounts for the vast difference in the show's feel by the end of its run. Duncan's romantic partner and antique shop co-owner, Tessa Noel, died in Season 2 in The Darkness, a genuine brutality wherein she was shot dead in a mugging, just after Duncan saved her from a different killer. She returned in spirit of sorts at the very end as an element of the dream sequence in the finale, but not in real time, and the episode in which she was killed off would serve as a landmark for how violent and emotional the series could truly get. The longest lasting of Duncan's long-term attachments, Richie Ryan, was an early presence and stayed in the series through Season 5, but after his death and resurrection in the same night, Tessa died. The young immortal was himself eventually murdered by Duncan in the Season 5 finale, Archangel, where McLeod unknowingly kills him, mistaking Richie for a demon associated with a story arc involving an evil being named Ahriman. Between Season 2 and Season 5, Highlander managed to dispose of the two most personally important people in McLeod's life over the long haul. The series added and then subtracted supporting characters constantly. In Season 2, we were introduced to Joe Dawson, who, in addition to owning the bar, would go on to become Duncan's secret watcher and serve as a narrator for the opening titles for much of the series. The oldest immortal, Mythos, was introduced late in Season 3 and became a recurring character played by Peter Wingfield after that. Duncan's best buddy, Hugh Fitzcairn, met an early end by beheading in Season 3, so by Season 6, McLeod's immediate supporting cast consisted primarily of Dawson, Mythos, and Amanda, and those are precisely the characters the show hinges its ending on. A final season built for someone else's spin-off. And this is the crux of it. The main point of Season 6 wasn't to give Duncan McLeod an appropriate farewell. It was to audition replacements for a completely different show. Apparently, the producers essentially used 4 of the 13 episodes in that last season to introduce new female immortal characters, Alex Raven, Kira, Katya, and Reagan Cole, any of whom could serve as the potential lead in an intended spin-off series. 2 of Season 6's episodes did not feature Duncan McLeod at all, and several more reduced him to little more than a cameo, as the show began quietly auditioning an immortal succession plan. The problem is that it all fell flat. The public reaction to the new candidates was, if the behind-the-scenes accounts in Highlander: The Complete Watcher's Guide are to be believed, anything from underwhelming to actively hostile, and the 4 leads ultimately were not chosen. When a spin-off was finally made, it opted for one of the female immortals already proven with the audience over the years, Elizabeth Grayson's Amanda, Duncan's recurring cat burglar and occasional romantic interest from Season 1 on. That show, Highlander the Raven, only ran for 1 season of 22 episodes before it too was eventually cancelled, for reasons supposedly related to sagging ratings and shifting syndication dollars. It's interesting to pause on how weird that looks on the screen too. Although Grayson and Peter Wingfield were given top billing in all 13 episodes of the final season, Grayson actually appeared in only 2, Wingfield in just 3, meaning that the majority of the top billed screen time on the final season actually went to actors who would play minimal to no role in subsequent non-spin-off related efforts, or to characters that no one particularly asked for and never would be seen again. The fact is that the original series in its short final season largely spent time casting a spin-off that ultimately did not require anyone that it auditioned. This is also the most logical explanation as to why the show shortened so significantly, Seasons 1 through 4 each featured 22 episodes. Season 5 dipped to 18 and Season 6 down to just 13. No single official explanation for this drop has been established, but funding cuts and the production team's focus on developing a spin-off clearly shaped the shortened season. To Be, Part 1 of the finale. Now, with all of this as the backdrop, we have the actual finale play out less like a big climax unfolding, and more like a silent farewell. The finale is split into two, namely To Be and Not To Be, airing in May 1993. The first part opens to a hostage situation going on where Duncan's old enemy Liam O'Rourke has Joe Dawson and Amanda kidnapped. Liam O'Rourke has been holding a grudge against Duncan for roughly 50 years. In 1946, Liam and his mortal lover, Tara, tried to recruit Duncan into their Irish nationalist cause. Duncan refused, and after their bombing killed civilians, he turned them over to the authorities. Both were convicted, and Liam blamed Duncan for Tara spending the rest of her life in prison. Once released, he looks for the perfect opportunity to avenge himself, which leads us to this moment, the hostage-taking of Dawson and Amanda. Liam offers to let them go in exchange for Duncan's life. Mythos will not let Duncan simply hand himself over, so he starts firing at Liam's group. During the chaos, O'Rourke shoots McLeod, whose apparently lifeless body is carried away on a moving railway engine. That is when the episode takes a pivot. Instead of immediately reviving as immortals normally do, McLeod is suddenly seen entering a dream journey, where he comes across his very old friend Hugh Fitzcairn, the one who had been killed in Season 3 itself. Fitzcairn becomes a guide for Duncan as they travel in this dream journey, with Fitzcairn showing him all the good deeds Duncan had done over the past 400 or so years. And suddenly things switch around. Now Fitzcairn is showing him how a world without Duncan would actually look like, in a world where he never existed to begin with. He shows his friend how Fitzcairn himself would have been dead for more than 200 years, right after an incident with the Crown goes wrong, with no Duncan to save his life. It was thanks to him that Fitzcairn even got to see the 20th century at all. This scene pays a direct homage to this Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life, and also builds up to the second part of the finale, continuing on the aspect of the life he never had. Not To Be, Part 2 of the finale. In the second half of the finale, we're shown a tour of that alternate reality in increasingly dark ways. Joe has been reduced to a bitter, broke vagabond, because the Watchers were taken from him by the vicious former Watcher vigilante, James Horton, who previously appeared as the villain in prior seasons. Without Duncan, there was no one to stop him. In that reality, Mythos didn't have the companionship of Duncan, pulling him towards other pursuits, and was once again with the Four Horsemen, the same group of raiders he rode with, back in the bad old days. He teamed up with the ancient immortal Kronos, following the death of a Watcher named Jillian, the woman he'd fallen in love with, and who was killed once Horton discovered who Mythos truly was. Richie was eventually recruited by Mythos and Kronos and was sent out to kill Joe, but he could not complete the task. Mythos then killed Richie himself for proving to be a weak link. Soon we see Duncan left fighting in his vision with an evil version of Mythos fully turned into a horseman. McLeod defeats that evil Mythos with a battle that resembles the one he had against Callus at the end of another finale a few seasons ago. Ultimately, the vision releases him and Duncan is brought back to the real world. The episode then wraps with its current plotline in the conventional manner with a sword fight against O'Rourke, observed by Joe, Mythos, and Amanda, and culminating in a quickening set to Amazing Grace. But in fact, the true concluding beat isn't the fight itself, but rather the immediately following scene, wherein McLeod thanks each of his companions by name, including a remark to Mythos where he states that he doesn't completely understand Mythos yet, but has still been shown the importance of accepting oneself, regardless of whether you're good or bad. Joe says in response to his thanks that he can't imagine his life without Duncan. So this is the way 6 seasons are ultimately ended, by an expression of gratitude to the 3 other characters standing with Duncan, as opposed to only one final show of force. Why the finale borrowed from a Christmas classic? The homage isn't at all subtle, it is quite evident, and the show seems to want it that way as well. The device used here of "What if I never existed" comes directly from the 1946 Christmas movie It's a Wonderful Life, from the story of a good-hearted man being guided by a good old friend to being shown an alternate version of life without him where everything is just worse. Highlander has taken quite a lot of inspiration from the Christmas classic. While in the movie, the character George Bailey does not die, but he is on the verge of killing himself when his guardian angel intervenes, and then shows him an alternate dark reality of what a world without him would look like. Also, it is pertinent to keep in mind how this scene from the series is so important, due to its unusualness. Mostly because where this show makes it a point to highlight how immortals never die, but instead they outlast and eventually replace one another, this scene touches upon the what-if aspect, a possibility no one ever thought about. So, along with the usual duel with any villain or antagonist at the ending of a season, this finale also ended on a reflection of friendships, the lessons learned in life, and gratitude, mostly for the people who are still a part of Duncan's life, and have remained close to him. And this majorly reflects the homage paid to the classic. How the critics rated the ending compared to the show's peak. To answer your implicit question, how did that softer, more thoughtful ending play with critics and longtime viewers? The DVD scores suggest a pretty consistent pattern. DVD Verdict's Rob Lineberger reviewed all 6 seasons when their DVD boxes were released and scored them 92, 93, 90, 92, 87, and 70 respectively. The first 4 seasons held fairly steady in the low to mid-90s before taking a bit of a dip with season 5 and then a real nosedive with season 6. Lineberger did not pull his punches, noting that he had always made no secret of his disappointment with the final season, and was actually truly disconnected for the first time as a lifelong fan of the series. Some outlets were even tougher. Chud's David Oliver gave season 6 a 3.9 out of 10, and comparing the overlong run to The X-Files, opined that both series had overstayed their welcome and that it was time for both to take their final bows like their lead actors were about to. That sharp decrease is almost perfectly aligned with that separate season spin-off test drive structure we touched upon above. After all, any season dedicated that heavily to building up a different show was inherently going to feel unfocused, compared to the 5 previous installments, and the critics certainly seemed to take notice. It should also be noted that most critics agreed the show's artistic peak was during its midlife, and not at the conclusion. Abby Bernstein of Audio Video Revolution stated it best when she referred to Season 5 as at the peak of its creative glory, while Kathy Huddleston over at Sci-Fi made the case for Season 4 and stated that, at that juncture, the show's writers knew how to bid farewell to their earlier supporting cast while still delving deeper into the remaining one. No matter where you fall on that discussion, both Season 5 and 4 clearly predate the 6th installment, and that final season's tumble feels less like an anomaly and more like a logical consequence of having writers' energy split between wrapping up Duncan's tale and ushering in his likely successor. Another DVD talk review for Season 3 reached that same conclusion from a slightly different vantage point, pointing out that most of the original longtime guest stars and recurring players like Mythos and Amanda were noticeably absent from the proceedings until the very end of the season, and one installment did not have the leading man at all. That dreaded spin-off test drive, the same point of issue occurring everywhere.
Can't imagine my life without you, Meg.
Life after the finale. Of course, that was hardly the end of Highlander's mythology. The eventual spin-off was Highlander the Raven, a solo show for Amanda after the new candidates introduced in the final season failed to connect with audiences. There would also be 2 further movie appearances for the Immortal himself. The first was 2000's Highlander Endgame, an interesting sequel of sorts that followed the television continuity and reintroduced Christopher Lambert's Connor to Adrian Paul's Duncan, the first time they would appear on screen together since the series pilot. A second outing in 2007, Highlander the Source, saw an older Duncan fighting his way through a hellish post-apocalyptic future. Reception to the film was less than stellar, and it seemed that the franchise's future might also end on an unfortunate note, with some who worked on the series having treated it as nothing more than a bad dream in subsequent years. Still, the mythos lives on, over the course of several novels which fill in some of Duncan's long past, and a brief reunion special featuring Joe, Amanda, and Mythos. The story of the eternal immortal fight carries on. After the low-key finale, it seems Highlander has managed to keep the Highlander the series mythology going, even in the slightest of ways. Did the Highlander get the ending it deserved? There is the tension at the center of it all, on its own terms to be and not to be, form a perfectly solid, emotionally rooted farewell to Duncan McLeod alone. It takes the audience's willingness to believe that he values a quiet, intimate look back at his relationships more than he would value another sword fight with an iconic antagonist, and ends on a thank you and a note of peaceful closure that the action-adventure syndicated drama couldn't afford to give its hero any more often. Yet it follows what felt like 13 episodes, where showrunners were writing towards an entirely different kind of show that they could not ultimately fulfill. Is an excellent character finale enough to salvage a season where the main hero was a passenger at best? The conclusion raises the stakes for those who watch the show, questioning the sincerity or fortune in ending an epic fantasy with that one powerful note when the show could not itself get it right earlier. So, to sum it all up, Highlander the series did not go out solely through a grand conventional final duel. Instead, it went out by showing Duncan's care for his friends, the good deeds committed by him over the past 4 centuries, and all of this in an It's a Wonderful Life style, alongside the actual last season building up towards a spin-off. It indeed is strange for a show as such to end not simply on a final victory, but on a note of gratitude and warm goodbye. Anyway, what do you think? Did McLeod deserve a grand final battle, or was the quiet goodbye just the perfect way to end it? Let me know down in the comments below what you think, and of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. That is all for today, and see you guys next time.